Days Gone didn't exactly take the world by storm when it launched in 2019. In fact, it kind of flopped. Critics were mixed, sales didn't meet Sony's expectations, and the fan reception, well, that's where things get interesting. So what went wrong? And why is this game still being talked about years later? If you've played it, or even just heard about it, you probably know it has pretty, complicated reputation. On the surface, it had all the ingredients of a hit. An open-world survival game, hordes of zombies, or freakers as they're called here, a rugged protagonist, and some truly stunning landscapes. But something didn't click. When Days Gone was first revealed back in 2016, people were hyped. It was being developed by Bend Studio, the team behind Siphon Filter, which was a cult classic back in the PS1 era. Plus, they hadn't released a big game in years, so the idea of them tackling a massive open-world survival game was exciting. And let's be honest, the trailers looked incredible. That footage of Deacon St. John running for his life as literal hordes of freakers chased him through a sawmill? It was insane. It felt like the kind of zombie game we'd been waiting for. The premise was solid. You're a biker turned drifter in a post-apocalyptic Oregon, trying to survive while dealing with bandits, zombie-like freakers, and your own tragic past. On paper, it sounded like a mix of The Last of Us and Sons of Anarchy, which, who wouldn't want that? But behind the scenes, development wasn't going as smoothly as those trailers made it seem. Bend Studio was relatively small compared to other PlayStation studios like Naughty Dog or Guerrilla Games, and Days Gone was an ambitious project. They were building a massive open world, creating dynamic hordes of enemies, and trying to tell an emotional story all at the same time. And then there were delays. Originally slated for 2018, the game got pushed back multiple times, with Sony reportedly stepping in to make sure the game was polished before release. Unfortunately, even with the delays, it still launched with its fair share of technical issues. When Days Gone finally dropped in April 2019, the reviews were not great. Critics pointed out a laundry list of problems: repetitive missions, bland characters, inconsistent pacing, and a lot of bugs. Some called it a generic open-world game that didn't bring anything new to the table. But the biggest complaint? The story. Many felt it was overly long and packed with filler content. Deacon, the main character, didn't really resonate with everyone. He was gruff, angry, and not exactly likable, which made it hard to connect with his journey. The game scored in the low 70s on Metacritic, which for a first-party Sony title was pretty disappointing. Sony had built a reputation for releasing polished, critically acclaimed games like God of War and Horizon Zero Dawn, so Days Gone felt like a step back. On top of mixed reviews, Days Gone didn't sell as well as Sony had hoped. While it wasn't a total flop commercially, it didn't hit the numbers of its PlayStation exclusives peers. For context, Horizon Zero Dawn sold over 10 million copies within 2 years. Days Gone? Nowhere close. It did eventually cross the 9 million mark, but a lot of that came much later, after price cuts, sales, and a PC release in 2021. Here's where things get interesting. While critics weren't kind to Days Gone, fans had a very different reaction. Over time, the game built a loyal following of players who appreciated its open-world design, the dynamic freaker hordes, and the emotional depth of its story. The relationship between Deacon and Sarah, while not perfect, struck a chord with some gamers. And the sheer terror of being chased by a horde of hundreds of freakers was something you didn't really get in other games. It wasn't polished, but it was ambitious, and for a lot of people, that ambition made up for the flaws. Even on Steam today, the game has overwhelmingly positive reviews, with many calling it underrated or misunderstood. When Days Gone launched, I was one of those players who dove in headfirst, despite all the mixed reviews. And let me tell you, my experience with the game was complicated. The first thing that struck me was just how gorgeous this world looked. Oregon's post-apocalyptic landscapes were stunning: rolling hills, dense forests, and abandoned towns that felt both haunting and alive. I remember my first ride on Deacon's bike, cruising through this eerie, desolate world while the sun set in the distance. It was one of those moments that made me stop and just take it all in. But then reality hit. Within an hour, I started running into some of the game's rough edges. The bike controls, they took some serious getting used to. The combat, let's just say it wasn't as smooth as I hoped. And the bugs. Oh man, the bugs. There was this one time I was ambushed by freakers only for them to glitch through a wall and disappear. Part of me was relieved, but mostly I was just annoyed. Still, something about Days Gone kept pulling me back. Maybe it was the horde mechanic. I'll never forget the first time I encountered a horde. It was terrifying. I was scavenging for supplies when I heard this distant rumble. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I turned a corner and saw them. Hundreds of freakers charging straight at me. My heart was racing as I bolted for my bike, barely escaping with my life. It was chaotic, messy, and exhilarating all at once. Then there was Deacon's story. Look, I get why some people didn't connect with him. He's gruff, angry, and not exactly the easiest guy to root for. But as I played, I started to understand him. Beneath all the bravado, there's this deep sense of loss and guilt that drives him, and it's hard not to feel for the guy when you see what he's been through. One mission that stuck with me involved tracking down a group of marauders who had been terrorizing survivors. As I crept through their camp, I couldn't help but feel the tension. The world of Days Gone isn't just about surviving freakers, it's about surviving humanity at its worst. And then there was the relationship with Sarah. At first, I thought it was kinda cliche, a tough guy motivated by the memory of his lost love. But the way their story unfolds, especially through flashbacks, hit me harder than I expected. There's this quiet sadness to it, like Deacon's whole existence is about holding on to hope in a world that's moved on. It's not perfect, but it worked for me. Of course, Days Gone isn't without its frustrations. The pacing can be all over the place, and some of the missions feel like busy work. I mean, how many times do I need to fetch fuel for my bike or clear out nests of freakers? But for every frustrating moment, there's something that made it worth it. Like that one time I stumbled onto a hidden camp in the middle of nowhere. The survivors were huddled around a fire, and it just made the world feel alive in a way that most open-world games don't. Or the time I spent way too long upgrading my bike, only to realize how much faster and smoother it made exploring the map. And then there are the freaker hordes. Let me tell you, those never stop being terrifying. Even after hours of gameplay, every encounter with a horde felt like a life-or-death struggle. I remember one mission where I had to lure a horde into a trap, and the sheer panic of being chased while trying to stay one step ahead was unlike anything I've ever experienced in a game. By the time I finished Days Gone, I had a newfound appreciation for it. Sure, it's flawed, it's messy, but it's also ambitious and deeply personal in a way that few games are. It's the kind of game that sticks with you. Not because it's perfect, but because it tries to be something more than just another open-world zombie game. So yeah, Days Gone has its problems, but when I think back on my time with it, I don't remember the bugs or the fetch quests. I remember the quiet moments riding through Oregon's wilderness, the adrenaline of escaping a horde, and the bittersweet feeling of Deacon's journey. So why did Days Gone flop? The reasons are a bit complicated. First, there's the expectations. Sony had set the bar incredibly high with games like The Last of Us and Horizon Zero Dawn, and Days Gone just didn't feel as polished or groundbreaking. Critics compared it to those games and found it lacking. Then there were the bugs and technical issues at launch. Open-world games are notoriously hard to get right, but players expect a certain level of quality from first-party studios, and Days Gone didn't deliver that at launch. Finally, there's the marketing. While the trailers showed off the freaker hordes, the actual game spent a lot of time on slower, more character-driven moments. It wasn't the fast-paced zombie survival game people thought they were getting, which left some players disappointed. In 2021, Days Gone got a second chance when it launched on PC. This version fixed a lot of the technical issues that plagued the original release, and for many players, it was their first time experiencing the game. The PC port was well received, with fans praising the improved performance and visuals. As of 2025, the game has overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam, and there are even rumors about a remastered version for the PS5. While a sequel seems unlikely, Ben's studio has moved on to other projects, Days Gone has carved out a place for itself as a cult favorite. It's not perfect, but it's a game that dared to take risks, and for a lot of players, those risks paid off. So, was Days Gone a flop? Technically, yes. It didn't meet Sony's expectations, and the critical reception was rough. But over time, it found its audience, and for many, it's one of the most underrated games of the last decade. If you've never played it, it's worth checking out, especially on PC or with a patched-up PS4 version. And if you did play it back in 2019, what did you think? Did it deserve the hate, or do you think it was unfairly judged? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.